St. Helena, 1,500 miles from the nearest continent. Population 4,000, one airport with no major ports. A British overseas territory in the middle of the South Atlantic, sitting on top of nothing, surrounded by nothing. Almost 3 days by ship from anywhere a person would normally go. At first light, on the morning of April 24th, in the small port town of Jamestown, a tender boat approaches the dock from a Dutch-flagged expedition vessel anchored in deep water off the headland. The ship is called the Hondius. A tender from a visiting ship is not unusual. This tender is unusual. It's moving slowly. There are no excited passengers on board, no expedition crew pointing at the cliffs of the island. There are 4 people in the boat. 2 of them are crew. One is sitting next to a long object on the floor of the tender, covered in a sheet. The 4th person in the tender is a deceased man's wife. She is on her way to the island's medical facility. From there, she will be airlifted to Johannesburg, South Africa, with the body of her husband. That's the plan. There is no other plan. The Hondius has another stop to make. Cruises run on schedule. What nobody on the tender knows, what nobody on the Hondius knows, what nobody at the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control will know for another 9 days, what nobody at the US Center for Disease Control will know for over 3 weeks, is what killed the man under the sheet and what is about to kill the woman riding next to him. To understand how a body ended up on the dock of one of the most isolated places on Earth, we have to go back to the beginning of the voyage. 3 weeks earlier. Andrew here for Permanent Underclass, where we explore the weird stuff your therapist would tell you to avoid. The, oh cool, now I'll never sleep again side of reality. If you're easily scared, easily offended, or easily anything, you're in the wrong place. Today, viruses. One of them is a reason a Dutch cruise ship is currently docked in Rotterdam, sealed off, undergoing decontamination. 3 of its passengers are dead. The rest scattered across 12 countries, most of them in quarantine. Some of them are in hospitals. Their names are not the point. The fact that the luxury vessel managed to distribute a deadly virus across nearly a quarter of the planet before anyone realized what was happening. That's what we're going to talk about today. That's the point. The second virus is in dairy barns in California, and it's already jumped from cattle to 36 farm workers globally. It kills roughly half the people it infects. One man in Louisiana is already dead from it. So far, it doesn't spread between humans efficiently so far. The third killed 50 million people the last time it ran. It came out of a US Army camp in Kansas in 1918, drowns the lungs of healthy 28-year-olds, and made the entire world wear masks for nearly 2.5 years. Everything made it possible: global troop movement, dense urban housing, secondary bacteria infections still exist today, plus 6 billion more people to infect. The 4th doesn't have a name yet. The World Health Organization keeps a working list of 1,625 candidates for the next pandemic. They've sorted the names, they've ranked them, they haven't ruled any of them out. A few of them might already be in someone's freezer, waiting, and the 5th one swells your brain inside your skull. Kerala, India. 94% of people who catch it die. There is no vaccine. There is no cure. The question this video is going to answer is not which one of these kills the most people. It's which one of these will kill us. Which one will slip past the fire breaks we built after 1918, after SARS, after COVID, and reach a number from which no civilization has come back. 5 viruses and 1 big math problem. We start with the one that's happening right now. The MV Hondius is not a normal cruise ship. It's a Royal Caribbean mega liner with water slides and Broadway shows. It doesn't carry 3,000 people, it carries 150. The Hondius is what's called an expedition vessel, Dutch flagged, operated by a company called Oceanwide Expeditions, reinforced ice class hull built to push through pack ice in water most ships can't enter. The Wendell Sea, the Norwegian fjords, the Antarctic Peninsula in austral summer, the kind of itineraries that don't have ports. The cabins cost between 14 and 22,000 euros per person for a single voyage. The people who book a trip on the Hondius are not impulsive vacationers. they've waited, they've planned, they've usually crossed off Africa, South America, and major capitals of Europe before they get to this. It is, for the most of them, the trip of a lifetime. Antarctica, the Arctic Circle, penguin colonies, the size of small towns, glaciers caving into water so cold it could kill you in 9 minutes. The trip that started last month was not, by the standard of an expedition cruise, unusual. 23 nationalities boarded the ship. The largest groups were Spanish, French, British, and American. There were also passengers from Germany, Switzerland, Netherlands, Australia, Canada, Singapore, South Africa, Turkey. 149 people in total were on the manifest when the ship set sail. The crew was a separate story. The crew on expedition vessels almost always comes from one or two countries that specialize in maritime labor. The Hondius is no exception. The bulk of the deck and crew is Filipino, 25 of them. They work month-long contracts. They live in shared quarters below the waterline of the ship. They run the galley, the laundry, cabin services, the Zodiac's landings. 2 Dutch medical officers as well as staff the small onboard clinic. A handful of expedition guides, naturalists, glaciologists, polar bear historians. 2 Dutch medical officers staff the small onboard clinic. A handful of expedition guides, naturalists, glaciologists, ornithologists, polar historians round out the rest. The expedition team is the reason people pay 22,000 euros for a cabin. There are the lectures, the storytellers are the part of the ship that turns a boat ride into an education. The whole thing is small. It runs like a small town in the winter. Every day at sea has the same rhythm. The ship moves at night. Mornings start before sunrise with a wake-up call delivered over cabin speakers. Breakfast is served at the same time every day. Coffee, fruit, bread, eggs, the same options on the same plates. By 8 a.m., the Zodiacs are in the water, small inflatable rafts, 8 people to a boat, ferrying passengers to whatever the day's landing is, a fjord, a rookery, a Russian research station, a stretch of black volcanic shore that no commercial ship can reach. Passengers ride these Zodiacs in shifts. The same boats, the same handles, the same breath. Lunch is communal. The dining room seats are not assigned. Passengers rotate. Spanish couples sit with British retirees. Americans get pulled into French dinner parties. The expedition teams eat with whoever is left over. The point of an expedition cruise is the people. By day 3, most of them have eaten and met everybody on the boat. Cocktails at 5, and then every evening at exactly 6 o'clock, the same thing happens. Every passenger, every off-duty crew makes their way to the main lounge. It is the largest room on the ship. It is the theater, seating 150 some odd people aboard. Big windows, low light, a single screen at the front. The expedition leader runs a recap of the day's landing. Photos, slides, stories with questions. The naturalists who saw the leopard seal answer questions about leopard seals. The historian who lectured on Shackleton expedition takes questions about Shackleton. The room sits together in what's close and softly lit space for nearly 2 hours. It's the best part of the day. In early April, one of the passengers reported a respiratory complaint at the ship's clinic. The clinic on an expedition vessel is small. 2 Dutch medical officers, basic diagnosis, defibrillator, a stretcher, a stocked pharmacy for the kinds of things you'd expect. Seasickness, sprained ankles, blood pressure issues, infected cuts from a Zodiac ship. A respiratory complaint on a cruise is not the usual. People come aboard already tired from long flights. They share air on planes, they share air at the embarkation hotel, they mix 200 new people in a closed space. By day 3 and 4 of any cruise, somebody has started a chest cold. Normally, this particular passenger was treated for what looked like a viral respiratory infection. Rest, fluids, and monitoring. He stayed in his cabin. His wife was on board. with him. She took care of him. 2 days later, he was worse. By April 23rd, he was in serious respiratory distress, and the ship was preparing to call at a scheduled stop a remote South Atlantic island called St. Helena. St. Helena is a British overseas territory in the middle of South Atlantic Ocean. It's famous for two things. Napoleon Bonaparte died in exile there in 1821, and it is some measure one of the most isolated, permanently inhabited places on Earth. The nearest mainland is 1,500 miles away. There is one airport with no major ports. Ships that call at St. Helena anchor offshore and ferry their passengers by a small boat. The Hondius arrived in the early morning of April 24th. The man in the cabin did not come ashore. He had died overnight on board before the island was in sight. The body was carried off the ship by the medical team and the captain, in compliance with international maritime regulation governing death at sea. The cause of death, as the crew understood it at the time, was viral pneumonia. The body was prepared for transport and held in cold storage in the island's medical facility. His wife disembarked with him. She was not at this point sick. She had not reported any symptoms. She had been the primary caretaker of her husband for the previous 2 weeks, but she walked off the Hondius under her own power. An airlift was arranged. The body of her husband and the woman herself were flown to Johannesburg, South Africa, the nearest city, with the medical infrastructure and the consular services to handle the situation. The Hondius continued its voyage. The wife did not survive long after she landed in Johannesburg. She presented with symptoms within 24 hours of arriving. By the time the South African medical staff understood what they were looking at, it was already too late. She died 48 hours after her husband. 2 deaths in 2 countries in less than 3 days. This is the moment the story... 2 deaths in 2 countries in fewer than 3 days. This is the moment the story becomes the story it is now, but it isn't the moment anyone realized it yet. To the medical staff in Johannesburg, the woman was a tourist who had buried her husband and collapsed under the weight of it. Grief is a known killer in older couples. Heart attacks after spouse's death are documented in literature. Her clinical presentation was respiratory, but she was 60-something years old, exhausted, freshly widowed, on antibiotics, and just off a long-haul flight from one of the most isolated islands on Earth. There were a dozen explanations available before anyone reached for the right one. A death certificate was issued. The Hondius, meanwhile, was halfway through its next leg, still running its schedule, serving meals at communal tables, still gathering everyone in the main lounge at 6 p.m. for the day's recap. And somewhere in that lounge, on each of those evenings, were the people who sat next to a man and his wife for 2 weeks every day in close quarters, sharing the same air. They didn't know that yet. May 2nd, 8 days after the Hondius left St. Helena, a second passenger died on board. The symptoms were the same. Days of what looked like the flu, fever, body aches, dry cough, and then suddenly, without warning, the lungs failing, trouble breathing, fluid where there shouldn't be fluid. By the time the medical team got the patient stabilized in the clinic, the patient was no longer responsive. Resuscitation efforts ran for over an hour. The patient was pronounced. This time, the medical officer did not write viral pneumonia on the form, because by this point, there was already a 3rd passenger in the clinic and the 4th showing early signs. And the spouse of the first victim, the woman who had died in Johannesburg, had been in close contact with multiple people on the ship for 2 weeks before disembarking at St. Helena. What had looked like a chest cold spreading on a cruise ship now looked like something else. The captain was informed the ship's protocols for serious medical incidents were activated. The 2 Dutch medical officers, both qualified physicians, both with experience handling outbreaks in remote locations, sat down at the clinic's desk and started writing down everything they knew. It was a short list. Several passengers, several respiratory illnesses, 2 deaths on board. 1 death traceable to the same outbreak in Johannesburg. Pulmonary edema with cardiogenic features. Onset rapid course, progressing despite supportive care. They did not have a diagnosis. they had a pattern. The Hondius is a Dutch flagged ship. When a flagged commercial vessel has a serious health incident at sea, there is a chain of notifications that has to happen. It runs through the flag state, in this case the Dutch Maritime Authority, and from there through public health bodies, depending on what the incident might look like. On May 2nd, after the second on-board death, the captain initiated that chain. The Dutch flag state was notified. The Dutch flag state notified the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, ECDC. Headquartered in Stockholm, is the EU's coordinating body for cross-border disease threats. The phone call that reached them described a cluster of severe respiratory illnesses on a Dutch cruise ship currently in the South Atlantic, with 2 on-board deaths, 1 off-board death, and an unknown number of additional symptomatic passengers. The ECDC officer who took the call would have had a very short checklist running. Were the cases linked by place and time? Yes. Was the clinic pattern? Were the cases linked by place and time? Yes. Was the clinical pattern unusual? Yes. Was there a known infectious cause? Not yet. Could the symptom profile be consistent with something to worry about? That was what they needed the lab to answer. By the end of that phone call, EDCD was tracking the Hondius as a cluster of unknown etiological with potential pandemic relevance. The phrase is bureaucratic. What it means is, in practice, is that doctors and epidemiologists across multiple countries are about to lose a lot of sleep. Specimens from the deceased passenger and from the surviving one. Specimens from the deceased passenger and from one of the surviving cases were prepared for transport, sealed, refrigerated, cataloged, flown out to a reference library equipped to identify what most labs cannot. The phone calls did not stop. What was happening on board clinically looked like nothing. What was happening on board clinically looked like nothing the medical officers had handled before. Hantavirus, pulmonary syndrome, also called hantavirus cardiopulmonary syndrome, because the heart fails as fast as the lungs do, does not announce itself. It starts the way 100 other things start. 3 to 6 days, low-grade misery. Fever, aches in the big muscles, especially the thighs and the lower back. Headaches, chills, sometimes nausea and vomiting, sometimes diarrhea, sometimes vague enough that a competent doctor would test for half a dozen common things before reaching for the rare one. Then the second phase. The second phase comes on abruptly, in a matter of hours. The patient develops a cough. Then shortness of breath. Then severe shortness of breath. The lungs begin to fill with fluid, not because the lungs themselves are infected and breaking down, but because the small blood vessels feeding them have started to leak. The fluid is plasma. The plasma is supposed to stay inside the blood vessel. With hantavirus, it does not. This is called profound capillary leak. It is the central mechanism of the disease. The lungs fill. Oxygen exchange collapses. The patient gasps for air. Then the heart, robbed of its working volume of blood, begins to fail. Blood pressure drops. The patient goes into cardiogenic shock. From the first cough to full respiratory failure can be 6 hours, in some cases less. There is no antiviral that treats it. There is no specific therapy to treat it. What hospitals can do, what the Hondius's 2-bed clinic could not do, is intubate, support breathing, support blood pressure, and try to keep the patient alive long enough for their own body to clear the virus. Mortality among severe cases is around 38%. In some South American outbreaks, it climbs to 60%. The samples came back from the reference lab. The result was a single virus, Andes hantavirus. There are over 50 hantaviruses known to science. They live in rodents, different rodents in different parts of the world, and most of them stay there. The ones that jump into humans usually do so through inhalation of dust contaminated with rodent droppings or urine. Hikers in cabins where mice have nested. Farmers cleaning out buildings in the spring. Soldiers in field positions. The infections that result are rare, regional, and almost never spread between people. Almost never. Andes hantavirus is the exception. Andes virus is found in South America. Its reservoir is a long-tailed pygmy rat that lives in fields and forests in Argentina and Chile. People who get infected in the normal pattern are people who were in the wrong place when the rats were there. Hikers, researchers, rural workers. What makes it different from every other hantavirus is what happened in 1996. A non-socionomical breakout, a notionomical outbreak, an outbreak inside a hospital occurred in South Argentina. Patients who had been treated in the same ward fell ill. Health workers fell ill. People who had never been near a rat fell ill. Genetic testing showed that they had been infected with the same strain of Andes virus, and the only common contact was each other. It was the first documented case of person-to-person hantavirus transmission in history. Since then, more outbreaks have shown the same pattern. Most studied was the Chubut province, Argentina, in late 2018. 34 people were infected from a single party. One patient in the predominant phase attended a wedding. His wife later attended his wake when she was febrile. One patient in the predominant phase attended a wedding. His wife later attended his wake. 10 more people caught at the wake. That is the kind of virus that was now in the Hondius. One patient in the predominant phase attended a wedding. His wife later attended his wake. 10 more people caught it at the same wake. That is the kind of virus that is now on the Hondius. A virus that, in the right conditions, a closed space, prolonged contact, a person who is infectious in the predominant phase before they even know they are sick, can move from one host to another person. And on the Hondius, those conditions had existed every evening at 6 p.m. in the main lounge for the last 3 weeks. The diagnosis answered one question. It opened 100 others. The 30-something passenger who had disembarked at St. Helena with the first victim's body had been on the Hondius the entire infectious window. They had eaten in the dining room. They had ridden in the same Zodiacs. They had sat in the lounge at 6 p.m. They had not, at the same time of disembarkation, been considered exposed to anything dangerous. Most of them had taken commercial flights home. Nobody knew where they were now. Crew rotations during the voyage had been considered too. Hotel staff who had rotated in and out. 2 Dutch medical officers themselves exposed every time they had taken a sick passenger to the clinic. Then there were the rest of the people still on the ship. 120 more bodies on the Hondius. Most of them statistically had been infected. Many of them statistically were already symptomatic without knowing it. Some of them statistically were going to die. The incubation period for Andes virus is anywhere from 4 to 24 days, median around 18 days. That means symptoms can show up almost 6 weeks after exposure. That means a person who walked off the Hondius at St. Helena April 24, who took a commercial flight to a connecting hub, who flew on a second commercial flight home, who walked into their own front door without a cough, that means a person who walked off the Hondius at St. Helena on April 24th, who took a commercial flight to a connecting hub, who flew on a second commercial flight home, who walked into their own front door without a cough, that person could begin showing symptoms any day from now through the first week of June. That person was now spread across the world. 23 nationalities, connecting flights, spouses, children, grandchildren, taxis, hotels, pharmacies, the clinics where they'd go if they started feeling unwell. The lab had given the Hondius's medical officer an answer. The answer was much worse than not knowing. How do you put a cruise ship's worth of contagion back into the bottle? The second virus on the list is bird flu. Most people think they know what bird flu is. They saw it in the news a few times. Some chickens got cold. There was a brief panic about eggs, and then it went away. It did not go away. Bird flu is a category of avian influenza viruses, and the one that matters most is H5N1. The technical name is highly pathogenic avian flu, or HPAI. The colloquial name is bird flu. The first known human cases came out of Hong Kong in 1997. 18 people got sick. 6 of them died. What was early warning signal for the most of the past decades, H5N1 has done a slow burn in poultry populations around the world. Periodically, it kills millions of birds. Periodically, a human catches it from an infected bird. The case fatality rate in confirmed human cases has been catastrophic. The World Health Organization tracks confirmed human infections globally. Since 2003, there have been 860 confirmed cases. 454 of those people have died. That is a case fatality rate of about 52%. The escalation happens in March 2024. H5N1 jumped from birds onto dairy cattle in the United States. For the first time in the history of the virus, the first farm was in Texas. The virus had since been identified in dairy herds in at least 16 US states. That should not be possible. Cows are mammals. We are mammals. The biological barrier between birds and us, the wall that has historically kept bird flu mostly in birds, has been jumped in cattle, in the country with the largest dairy industry on the planet Earth. Since the spillover, 70 human cases have been confirmed in the United States. 41 of them were dairy farm workers. 36 were in California alone. Most of the cases have been mild. Pink eye, fever, sometimes a cough. One man in Louisiana caught it from his backyard birds. He died. A child in British Columbia, Canada, caught it. She was hospitalized in critical condition. She survived. H5N1 is now circulating in more than 30 mammalian species worldwide. Red foxes in the Netherlands, harbor seals along the Atlantic coast, mountain lions in the American West, house cats, a polar bear north of the Arctic Circle. In some of those species, especially the carnivores, the virus causes severe neurological disease, seizures, and death. The virus is also showing up in the milk. Unpasteurized milk from infected dairy cattle has been found to contain live infectious H5N1 virus. Pasteurization inactivates it. Raw milk does not get pasteurized. The rational door that needs to close here is the one that says, I don't have to worry about bird flu because bird flu doesn't really infect humans. The door closes like this. H5N1 is in the US milk supply. It has killed at least one American on US soil. It has hospitalized a child in Canada. It is mutating inside dairy cattle, which means it is getting practice with mammalian biology. And flu viruses, when they infect the same cell, swap genes with each other. Every time H5N1 lands in a host that is also carrying a seasonal flu virus, there is a chance, a small chance, but a real one, that the two viruses will reassort on, and the next generation of H5N1 will inherit human-to-human transmissibility from the seasonal flu. The only thing this virus is missing is efficient spread between humans. It is in the room with us now, learning how. Bird flu is the virus that's getting practice. The next one on the list is the virus that already finished its run. The third virus is the one that already ran. In spring of 1918, in the middle of World War, an American military base in Kansas, a soldier reported to the infirmary with a fever and a cough. He was the first known case of what would within a year kill between 50 and 100 million people. The base was called Camp Funston, and the virus was H1N1 strain influenza A. The pandemic that followed is what history books called the Spanish flu. Although it had nothing to do with Spain. Spain just happened to be neutral in the war and had less wartime presence, censorship, so the outbreak got more newspaper coverage there. The virus came from Kansas. It rode the troop ships east. It infected about 1/3 of every human being alive on Earth at the time, roughly 500 million people. Of those, somewhere between 50 and 100 million died. The lower estimate is more than the combat deaths of both world wars combined. The upper estimate is close to the entire population of Italy. Influenza normally kills the very young and the very old. The mortality graph has a shape. It's called a U-curve. Death rate high at the youngest ages, low through middle adulthood, climbing back up to the elderly. In 1918, the mortality graph was a W. There was a spike at young ages, a spike in the elderly, and then in the middle of the W, a third spike, a huge one, composed of healthy adults in their 20s and 30s. The peak of that spike was at exactly age 28. People who by every measure of physical health were absolutely at the peak of life. People who survived the war, people who finished medical school, people who got married last summer, people who just had their first child. A 2013 study in the journal PLOS offered a theory why age 28 specifically. People born in 1890 who had been 28 years old in 1918 were infants during the previous global flu pandemic, the so-called Russian flu of 1889 and 1990. The theory holds that early life exposure to that early virus primed their immune system in that way. When they met the very different 1918 virus, produced a fatal overreaction. The mechanism is what's called a chitin storm, a massive runaway immune response in which the body's own defenses turn into a weapon that kills it. The patient's lungs fill with fluid, not because of bacteria, but because of physical lung damage, because the immune system is firing all of its inflammatory cells at once and drowning the lungs from the inside. People in their 20s were dying within days, some within hours of the first cough. Their skin turned blue from oxygen deprivation. They drowned in plain sight on hospital beds with no one able to help them. The rational door for 1918 is the one that says we have antibiotics now, we have vaccines now, we have hospitals. Modern medicine would stop it. The door is closed by mathematics. Antibiotics didn't exist in 1918, but antibiotics treat bacteria, not flu. Most of the people who died from the bacterial pneumonia, but they died from ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome, which we still have no specific treatment for in days only support equipment to keep someone alive long enough for the body to fight on its own. A vaccine for a novel flu strain takes 6 months. In 1918, wave killed 25 million people in the first 12 weeks. 6 months means 12 weeks already buried. 1918 is the virus that already finished its run. The next one is the virus that hasn't started yet. The fourth virus on the list doesn't have a name. It doesn't have a face. It doesn't have a confirmed reservoir. It might be in someone's freezer right now. It might be in a goat in West Africa. It might be in a coronavirus that hasn't crossed to humans yet, but will when the conditions are right. Some of it doesn't exist yet at all. The World Health Organization calls it Disease X. The Disease X concept was introduced in 2018. It is the name the WHO gives the unknown pathogen that will cause the next major pandemic. The point of the term is to force the global health community to plan for something they cannot fully describe, to develop diagnostics, vaccines, and treatment protocols that can be adapted in a hurry when the unknown pathogen actually does appear. When COVID-19 emerged in late 2019, public health officials retroactively classified it as the first known disease X. The system had been thinking about a virus exactly like it 14 months when it appeared. The current disease X list, the WHO's working rankings of pathogens most likely to cause the next pandemic, was last updated in 2024. It contains 1,625 candidates for pathogens. Each one is assessed across multiple criteria. How does it transmit? How severe is the illness it causes? Are there existing countermeasures? Could it evolve into a bigger threat? The list draws from 28 viral families and one major group of bacteria. The family that gets the most attention are the ones with established track records of becoming pandemic events. Coronavirus, the family that produced SARS, MERS, and COVID. Filoviride, the family that produced Ebola and Marburg. Arenaviride, Lassa fever. Bayunaviride, Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, and our friend the hantavirus. Paramavexviride, hantavirus, and related family of brain-attacking viruses we'll talk about in a minute. Flaviviride is the Zika virus. Each one of those families includes viruses we already understand. Each one of them statistically contains the next pandemic. The 2024 update officially acknowledges something the original 2018 list did not. The threat model now includes pathogens that emerge not from wild reservoirs but from laboratories, through accidents, through what's called gain-of-function research, where viruses are deliberately enhanced to study how dangerous traits emerge, or through bioterrorism. This is not science fiction. This is in the World Health Organization document. 94% of zoonotic viruses that have impacted humans are RNA viruses. RNA viruses mutate faster than DNA viruses. They evolve faster. They escape immunity faster. They are also the family that gain-of-function research most frequently target because they're the ones that pose the greatest natural pandemic risk. The next disease X might emerge from a goat in West Africa, or might emerge from a freezer in a facility in any one of 20-some countries that operate biosafety level 4 laboratories. The rational door for disease X is the one that says we'd see it coming. There would be warning signs. There would be time. That door is closed by definition. The whole concept of disease X is the pathogen we don't see coming. By the time it has a name, by the time it's been characterized, by the time the World Health Organization can tell you what family it's in, the first wave has already happened. That's the list. That's the rule. The list of 1,625 is what we know to watch for. The next pandemic is statistically the one that isn't on the list yet. The next one on the list, the last one, is the virus we've known about nearly 30 years, and it hasn't gotten any easier to stop. The fifth virus is the one we already knew. It has been studied for almost 3 decades. There are entire research labs dedicated to it. There are surveillance programs across South and Southeast Asia. There are public health protocols for what to do when it appears. It is also, by a significant margin, the deadliest of the 5 viruses on this list, and we still cannot stop it. That virus is called Nipah virus. Nipah is a parazoxum virus. The reservoir is a fruit bat, specifically several species of genus Petropus, including the Indian flying fox. The bats are tolerant carriers. They live in roosts around farms and villages across South and Southeast Asia. They eat fruit. They urinate on fruit. They drop partially eaten fruit on the ground. People who get infected in the normal pattern get infected from contaminated fruit, or from pigs that got infected from contaminated fruit, or from another infected person who's been around contaminated fruit or pigs. Nipah was first identified in 1998 in Malaysia. The original outbreak was traced to pig farms. 276 people were infected. About 38% of them died. Malaysia's strain was the gentler one. The Bangladesh strain is one that scares public health officials. Bangladesh has had near annual Nipah outbreaks since 2001. The same strain crossed the border into eastern India that year and caused an outbreak in West Bengal. 66 cases, 45 deaths. That outbreak demonstrated for the first time clearly that Nipah can transmit between humans. In 2007, in a place called Nadia, India, a 5-person family caught Nipah. All 5 died. A healthcare worker who treated one of them also caught it. She also died. In 2018, Nipah arrived in Kerala for the first time. 23 confirmed and probable cases. The case fatality rate was 91%. It came back in 2021. 1 case, 100% mortality. It came back in 2024. 2 cases, 100% mortality. It came back in 2025. 4 confirmed cases, 2 deaths. Kerala has the best public health system infrastructure in India. Its medical schools are world class. Its surveillance system catches new outbreaks within days. The state has been actively fighting the specific virus for 7 years. The fatality rate has not moved. Sometimes it's 91%, sometimes it's 100%. The clinical picture is consistent. Patients develop fever, then headache, then disorientation, then encephalitis, inflammation of the brain, and seizures and coma, then death. There is no vaccine. There is no cure. The treatment is supportive care, which keeps a patient alive long enough to die comfortably. The World Health Organization added Nipah to its priority pathogens list in 2022. The rational door for Nipah is the one that says if a virus is established, if it has a known reservoir, if it's been studied, we can stop it. The door is closed by Kerala. 7 years. World-class medicine, the fatality rate hasn't moved. If Nipah ever broke containment, if it ever mutated to spread more efficiently between humans the way Andy's hantavirus does, there is nothing currently in global medicine toolkit that would be able to stop it. 4 doors closed. 5 viruses on the table. None of them is more dangerous than the others. They are all dangerous in different ways. H5N1 is the virus that's already in mammals next to us getting practice. 1918 is the virus we've already lost 100 million people to once. Disease X is the virus we cannot prepare for because we don't yet know what it is. Nipah virus is the virus we know exactly and still cannot stop. And Andy's hantavirus is the virus that just docked in Rotterdam. The rational floor of the assumption that this couldn't really happen to us has dropped. It's the time to talk about what actually happens. May 18th, 3 weeks after the first death, the MV Hondius reaches the Dutch port of Rotterdam at 4:30 in the afternoon local time. It's no longer carrying its original passenger manifest. The bulk of the passengers, the people who had not died on board, the people who had not been evacuated at St. Helena, the people who had not been airlifted off in Tenerife on May 10th and 11th had already disembarked. The ship is carrying 25 crew, 2 Dutch medical officers, and the body of 1 passenger who had died on board, sealed and prepared for cremation. That's what's arriving in Rotterdam. The dockside protocol is not a normal one. Rotterdam Port Authority has been coordinating with Dutch National Public Health over 2 weeks at this point. There are rules for what a Dutch-flagged ship returning to home port after confirmed hantavirus outbreak looks like. The ship is met, not by passengers' family, not by cargo handlers, by teams of protective equipment. 25 crew disembark in stages. Each one is retested for Andy's hantavirus before they're allowed to leave. None of them at this point are showing symptoms. None of them have tested positive in the last 48 hours. They are taken into quarantine in Rotterdam, not back to their countries, not even back to their families in the Filipino community in the Netherlands quarantine. 21 days, the full incubation window. 2 Dutch medical officers go into separate self-quarantine. They had treated every infected passenger in the clinic. They had no way of knowing what they had inhaled. The body of the passenger leaves the ship in the same way the woman left the Hondius at St. Helena. Sealed, in compliance with international maritime regulation, carried off with quiet care by people in masks. The MV Hondius itself, the ship begins its disinfection protocol, top to bottom. Cabins, the lounge, the dining room, the bridge, the clinics, the crew quarters, the Zodiacs. Ocean-wide expositions, the operator announces that the ship is expected to resume cruise operations later in the season. 18 Americans had been on the Hondius. They had flown home from the Canary Islands evacuation on May 10th and 11th. They had passed through commercial airports. They had connected through European hubs. They had landed in US cities. They had gone home to their families. Then the CDC reached for the phone. On May 18th, the same day the Hondius docked in Rotterdam, the US Center for Disease Control and Prevention confirmed that 18 passengers were being requested to remain at the Nebraska quarantine facility through May 31st. That date is exactly 21 days after the last day any of them could have been exposed to the ship. The 21-day mark is the outer edge of the Andes hantavirus incubation window. After that, if they haven't shown symptoms, they're considered clear. For 2 of those passengers, the request became an order. The CDC's acting director signed federal quarantine orders under the Public Health Services Act, specifically 42 CFR Parts 70 and 71 federal quarantine, legally binding, issued under emergency authority. The Public Health Service Act gives the federal government extraordinary powers in the case of a communicable disease threat. It can be used to detain people who have been exposed to specific pathogens, yellow fever, the plague, smallpox, novel influenza strains. The list of pathogens for which federal quarantines can be invoked is short. Hantavirus, prior to May 2026, was not on it routinely. For 2 American citizens, that changed. They were not free to leave the Nebraska facility. They were not free to refuse the testing. They were not free to return to their families, their jobs, their pharmacies, their dentists. For 3 weeks, they were in federal isolation under federal law because they had been in the wrong cruise ship. This is in US public health terms a very rare event. It is also in US public health terms exactly what the system is designed to do. The Nebraska Quarantine Facility exists because situations like this. The Public Health Service Act exists because constitutional questions: can the government detain a citizen who is not yet sick? Was answered by Congress with the answer, yes, if the alternative is letting the next pandemic walk through customs. The Hondius forced the answer to be tested. 12 countries. That's how many separate national public health systems had to coordinate in real time to track the people who had been on the MV Hondius. Australia, Canada, Germany, the Netherlands, St. Helena, Singapore, South Africa, Spain, Switzerland, Turkey, and the United States. In each of those countries, former passengers were hospitalized or quarantined. In each of those countries, the local public health system had to identify who those people were, locate them, contact them, test them, and depending on results, isolate them and trace everywhere they'd been and everyone they'd been in contact with since they'd come home. In several of those countries, additional cases were confirmed after disembarkation. France reported a case, Spain reported a case, Canada reported a case. Each one was someone who had walked off the Hondius believing themselves to be uninfected, believing themselves to be a tourist, a survivor, a person going home, and then days later had begun showing symptoms. The European Center for Disease Prevention and Control coordinated the European response. The Pan-American Health Organization handled the Americas. The WHO was in the loop. The flag state, the Netherlands, was the official authority. The country where the body was, St. Helena, the South Africa. Then back to the Netherlands followed parallel protocols. The communication chain ran across 3 continents, 4 oceans, and 5 languages, in 3 time zones at any given moment for the better part of 3 weeks. This is the level of international coordination required to manage 11 cases, 9 confirmed, 2 probable, 3 deaths, 1 ship. The next pandemic will not be 11 cases. The next pandemic, by definition, will be thousands, then millions before the diagnostic confirmation has cleared the reference lab. The system that handled Hondius, the system that coordinated 12 health authorities across 3 continents over 3 weeks, is the same system that will be asked to handle the next one. It is the system the world has. There is no backup system. There is no second-tier system that activates when the first one is overwhelmed. There is only this one, working hard, and it's the limit of how fast it can move. This is the part of the story where you have to stop and look at the thing. What happened on the MV Hondius, the actual mechanism, the actual sequence, is not an unusual tragedy. It's not a freak event. It's not a once-in-a-generation outlier. It's the template. A wealthy traveler from one country on a cruise ship with wealthy travelers from 22 other countries. They shared meals at communal tables. They shared a closed lounge for 2 hours every evening. They share zodiac rides and lectures and excursions. They are in contact with each other and with the crew and with each other's coughs and breaths and shared surfaces for 2 weeks. One of them is sick. Nobody knows it. The first symptoms appear. They seem like a flu. The ship's medical team treats it like a flu. The patient gets worse. The patient then dies. The ship continues to its scheduled stops. Passengers continue to disembark on schedule at ports of call, with no reason yet to suspect anything more than a single tragic illness. By the time the second death happens, by the time the pattern becomes visible, by the time a lab in Stockholm confirms the diagnosis, the people who were in that closed lounge every night for 2 weeks are home. They are spread across 23 countries. They are in their own homes. They are in their grandchildren's daycares. They are in the pharmacy buying cold medicine for what they think is just a cough. The diagnosis arrives. The phone starts calling. The quarantine orders to go out. Federal authority is invoked. International coordination ramps up. Test kits are flown. Contact tracers are dispatched. Health ministries in 12 countries met by video. And by the time all of that machinery is clicked into place, the virus has been moving inside a dozen separate national populations And by the time all of that machinery has clicked into place, the virus has been moving inside dozens separate national populations for 10 to 40 days. The Hondius outbreak is small. 11 cases, 3 deaths. The Hondius outbreak is small. 11 cases, 3 deaths. A virus that in this strain does not yet have the human-to-human transmittability to break containment after it leaves the ship. But what if it did? What if the virus on the next ship was a strain of disease X with COVID-level airborne transmittability and the case fatality rate of Andy's hantavirus? The exact same sequence, the exact same passenger profile, the exact same lounge, the exact same ports, the exact same flights home, the exact same 3-week delay between first death and full diagnostic confirmation. The exact same world scaled up. The next pandemic does not need to invent anything new, it just needs to use what already exists. A cruise ship, a 23 nationality manifest, a long intubation period, a 2-week communal evening lecture, and enclosed lounge. The Hondius was not the worst case, it was a dry run. What held this time was a system. What held was the diagnostic infrastructure, the reference labs that could identify Andy's hantavirus when most labs could not. The data sharing agreements that let the lab get the answer to a Dutch flag state in under 2 days. The legal framework that let the CDC quarantine American citizens before they got sick. The international coordination that let 12 countries track 11 cases across 3 continents. What held this time was the science. Andy's hantavirus has been studied for nearly 30 years. Person-to-person transmission has been documented since 1996. Containment protocols exist. Public health workers across South America have trained on outbreaks of this exact pathogen. What was the demographic 11 cases is, in epidemiological terms, almost nothing. It was small enough to handle, it was small enough to coordinate, and it was small enough for the system to absorb without falling over. What did not hold was the question of whether it always will hold together. Andy's hantavirus is the only hantavirus with documented person-to-person transmission. It is also a hantavirus that for nearly 30 years has been confined almost entirely to South America. Until April 2026, it had never appeared on a cruise ship operating in the South Atlantic. Until April 2026, it had never spread from passenger to passenger inside confined commercial vessel. Until April 2026, it had never needed federal quarantine to be invoked in Nebraska. Now it's done all those things. The system that responded held 3 deaths, 11 cases, a coordinated international response that contained an outbreak before it became more than that. But what the Hondius proved is that the conditions for a much larger version of this exist right now, all the time. 23 nationalities in one closed space, 6 weeks intubation window, 3 weeks between the first death and the confirmed diagnosis, 12 countries to coordinate across. The system held against Andy's hantavirus. The next virus on a ship like Hondius may not be Andy's hantavirus. In Rotterdam, the disinfection of the MV Hondius is now complete. The ship is being returned to service later this summer. Ocean-wide Expeditions has announced no changes to its itineraries. Somewhere in the South Atlantic, in the next 2 months, a different group of 149 passengers from 23 countries will board the same ship for a different voyage. They will not be told what happened in the lounge. 3 weeks ago, in this story, we said something easy to miss. We said that every evening at 6 o'clock, every passenger on the MV Hondius and almost most of the off-duty crew gathered in the main lounge. They sat together, about 140 of them, in theater seating in low light for nearly 2 hours, listening to the expedition leader recap the day's landings, watching photos, asking questions about leopard seals and Shackleton and the geology of pack ice. It was the best part of the day. Now we know what else is happening in that room. For at least 2 weeks before the first person on the Hondius reported symptoms to the ship's clinic, the man who had brought Andy's hantavirus on board was in that lounge every night, and so was his wife. They sat in the same seats. They drank from the same glasses. They breathed the same air in the same room with everybody else on the ship for 2 hours at a time for 14 consecutive evenings. By the time he had a cough, the virus was already circulating. By the time he was in respiratory distress, it had already moved. By the time the second onboard death made the pattern visible, the people who had sat next to him every night were on flights home. 11 confirmed and probable cases of Andy's hantavirus. Look at where they ended up. 9 European countries: Canada, the United States, South Africa, St. Helens, Singapore, Australia, Turkey. 12 separate national health systems on 3 continents. All 11 of them had one thing in common. All 11 of them at some point in the previous month had been sitting in the same lounge on the MV Hondius at exactly 6 o'clock in the evening, listening to a talk about penguins, while a man near them was breathing the start of a fatal disease into the closed air in a small room. That was what the lounge was. That is what 6 p.m. on the Hondius turned out to mean. When we started telling this story, we said the planted details was that the 6 p.m. recap was the best part of the day. Right now, everything we know, that line lands differently. Not because the people in the room were doing anything wrong. They weren't. They were on vacation. They were enjoying a lecture. They were doing what people pay 22,000 euros a cabin to do. The 6 p.m. lounge wasn't a failure. The 6 p.m. lounge was working exactly the way it was designed to work, to bring strangers together every evening in close quarters, in close space for 2 hours of shared experience. That is also how a virus moves. 3 people are dead. A man who boarded the MV Hondius for a trip of a lifetime, his wife who died in a hospital in Johannesburg 48 hours later after he did. A second passenger who died on board on May 2nd. We are not naming them. Their families are grieving right now. The stories do not need their names for it to be the story that it is. What I will say is that there are and were real people. They had families, they had homes, they had probably looked forward to this cruise for years. They did not deserve what happened to them, and what happened to them was not bad luck. It was a small statistical reality of the world we live in. A world where over 50 hantaviruses circulate in rodent populations around the planet, where one of them can move from person to person, and where a closed lounge on a luxury expedition cruise happened to be the place that a virus found a way out of South America. The 25 crew members are still in quarantine in Rotterdam. Most of them are Filipino. Their families are waiting in homes thousands of miles away to find out whether their husbands and brothers and sons are going to be sent back, or will they be sent back sick. The 18 Americans were released from Nebraska quarantine facility at the end of May. Most of the rest of the passengers are home. Some of them will recover, some of them, statistically, may not. This is happening right now. The World Health Organization's list has 1,625 entries on it. Andy's hantavirus is on the list. It has been on the list since the list existed. Public health officials in 50 countries have spent years training for exactly the situation that just played out on the MV Hondius. They knew what could happen. They knew where it could come from. They knew the clinical picture. They knew the legal authorities that they could invoke. And the response was still slower than the virus. 3 weeks between the first death and the disinfection of the ship. 3 weeks during which the world got lucky. Got lucky that Andy's hantavirus, even in its most transmittable form, doesn't spread efficiently after the primordial phase. Got lucky that the case fatality rate, while terrible, is not high enough for the 11 confirmed cases to become 1,100. Got lucky that the system caught it before it became something it could not catch. That was the Andy's hantavirus. There are 1,624 other entries on the list. Some of them are more transmissible. Some of them are more deadly. Some of them have no vaccine, no treatment, no pre-existing countermeasures, and no public health track record to learn from. Some of them are paramesoxal viruses like Nipah. Nipah viruses swell the brain. Some of them are filoviruses like Marburg viruses that liquefy the inside of you. Some of them are coronaviruses like SARS, viruses that already taught the world 23 years ago how fast Some of them are coronaviruses like SARS, viruses that already taught the world 23 years ago how fast respiratory pathogens move through global air travel. And some of them aren't on the list yet because they haven't been discovered. The next pandemic is on the list. The next pandemic is on that list right now, today, at this exact moment as you watch this video, and the list has 1,625 names on it, and none of them have been ruled out yet. We don't know which one. We don't know when. We only know that the ship has already left port. What we have between now and the next one is what the MV Hondius taught us. That the system, when it works, can hold against 11 cases on one ship across 12 countries in 3 weeks. That federal authorities can be invoked and the reference labs can identify the impossible. That international coordination is real and it functions even at the limits of its design. We also know that the conditions that produce the Hondius outbreak, the long incubation, the closed shared spaces, the global passenger manifest, the diagnostic delay exist all over the world every day in places far less identifiable than a luxury cruise. The system held this time. There is no reason to believe it always will. If this kind of story keeps you up at night, do me a favor, like and subscribe. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Permanent Underclass and on X at The Underclasser. We post stuff there that doesn't always make it to YouTube. There are more viruses on the World Health Organization list that researchers in BSL-4 laboratories worry about more than anything else. Things sealed inside double-walled glass cases and negative pressure rooms behind biometric airlocks we're going to talk about. Until then, stay informed, stay aware. The next ship has already left port.